So Mark chapter 1, and as you know, I've been dividing it into sections. And we started off with the first disciples um, in verse 16. And we see this, when I say telescoping narrative, we see Jesus passing by the Sea of Galilee, calling these fishermen to come and follow him. Calls two other brothers, and they're in Capernaum. They went into the city from this from the Sea of Galilee on the Sabbath, which we know is a short walk, and we see incredible interaction between Jesus and the people there, and Jesus and an unclean spirit. But now we're moving into um, this little section. A lot of them will have Bibles have a subheading say healings at Capernaum, multiple, which is important. And this is another place where this is a section that we're going to divide into two subsections. So starting at verse 29, we'll focus through 29 through 31 today, but I want to read the two together. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went into Simon and Andrew's house with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was lying in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. The fever left her, and she began to serve them. When evening came, after the sun had set, they brought to him all those who were sick and demon-possessed. The whole town was assembled at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So when we look at this, we see, sorry, I forgot to get my notes up here. Probably not best if I try to work from nothing but memory. But we see, I think we see something remarkable here. We first see Jesus in a public ministry as a launch point, if you will. Very public. And when you look at this other section, we have to remember that Jesus is choosing the settings for what we're being told about his life and ministry. This is intentional. He's already planned where he's going next. This isn't just he happens to find himself in these places. He's choosing this because remember, the disciples that he's chosen are following him. That means he's the lead. They're not just wandering around and taking what comes their way and responding to it or reacting to it. This is purposeful and planned. What's interesting is you take a look at where he was in the synagogue. He chose that scene. But then the very next, as soon as he leaves it, what's the next word that we see? There's that word from Mark right away, immediately. There it is again. This is like his theme, right? You know how you can hear just a few notes from a theme song from a movie you're really familiar with, and immediately you can picture the movie, right? This is his theme song immediately, right away. What's interesting is that Mark could have shown us the end of the day and not this part of the story. Because this isn't part of the demonstration of the public ministry that we see at the beginning. So there's a reason that the Holy Spirit prompts Mark to focus on this part of the story. And it's only three little verses, but it's packed full of a lot of incredible theology. Because he goes from teaching a vast crowd and this incredible demonstration of kingdom power and authority to ministering to a family and one particular member of the family. So he's gone from this public display to this private witness. this tells us something really profound about what it means for the kingdom to come near. We think of the kingdom coming near, this big fanfare and, big parade and stuff like that. But what Mark is helping us see here, the kingdom coming near is both large and small. It's both pronounced and private. Again, we see this immediately. This is the 14th time Mark has used this just in the first chapter. And it says, having gone out. So it's showing this is the very next thing. He left the synagogue and went to Peter's house. And think about this, though. Who's with them? James and John. Right there, we see the inner circle. Not just from their calling, but throughout that whole first day. In the synagogue, we had the entire Capernaum congregation. We had scribes, religious leaders. We had the demon-possessed man. But here we have 4 disciples and the immediate household of one of them. That's a very small group. So he goes from maximum visibility to relative invisibility, if you will. But what's interesting, in both settings, we see the full power and authority of Jesus flowing freely. There's nothing in the way. There's no obstacles. There's no hesitation. It just flows freely from him. The word picture that often comes to my mind is like ripe fruit falling from a tree. When it's time, you don't have to pick it. You don't have to shake the tree. And that's what I see in this narrative is that the authority and power, even just the attention of Jesus, it flows freely from him, which means it's a core aspect of who he is. Right? And what's interesting is when we look at this narrative, we see him going from teaching to touching. So teaching is a public thing. Physical contact is a very personal, intimate thing.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
It makes me think that, so healings in general, right? Public ones are for his glory, to show his power, his majesty, all that.
Also to point to the validity of the message.
Yeah. And then the personal ones even show his care and his concern, but also
Yes.
I've heard teachings that Jesus doesn't heal for vanity, he heals for ability.
Yeah.
Because it says right here, she immediately started to serve.
Exactly. Yeah. And think about this. Jesus is adapting his approach to the need of the moment. And he goes from the spectacular to the simple. Not simplistic, but simple. So you have this dramatic, violent, loud crowd, attention-getting, crowd astonishing, down to the point where he heals one fevered woman. And he pays very particular attention just to her. And it's important to be able to see one is not less than the other. Both of them are a vital part of who Jesus is in his ministry. So already just in these 2 stories, we see his power and his compassion being woven together. Right. This really reveals his heart. He's not being driven by what the crowds might say, by what the press release might say or what might be on the news. He's not focused on the next dramatic moment. We see him go from, he actually cared for that demon-possessed man. He had a care and concern for that demon-possessed man. But then he turns that same care and concern down to a more personal level. Okay? Because this lady ran a household. The whole household's in disarray. There's a level of chaos that the family is experiencing, and this is Peter's household, right? So um, um, the whole family is being impacted by this. So this is just care for her; it's care for the whole family. Um, let's see. I lost my place again, which I do sometimes. Um, let's see. Another key point here is remember the kingdom has come near. So one of the things we talk about often is what are the values of the kingdom? What is the economy of the kingdom? Because that's the economy we need to operate in, right? And this is he's revealing the values of the kingdom and the economy of the kingdom. There's no hierarchy of importance in Jesus's ministry. Everybody's equally important to him. Think about how often you've said or you've heard someone say, I don't, yeah, it's not that big a deal. Other people have it worse than me. That's not actually as humble as it sounds, right? Because you got demon possession in a synagogue and you got a fever in a home, both receive his full, undivided attention. Both are equally important to him. So you sleep wrong and you end up with a stiff neck. That's just as important to him as a person who's struggling with cancer. What's different is how much of his power needs to be released, not whether it will be or not. And how much of it needs to be released, depending on what he wants to accomplish, that's what's going to be released into this. It has nothing to do with the severity. That's the economy of the kingdom. We work in a completely different economy if you think about it. That's more important than what I'm struggling with, or what I'm struggling with is more important than what that person is. That's not the economy of God's kingdom. These are very, very important things for us to get a hold of. It also shows us a balance in ministry. And I know people that are involved in ministry, I'm one of them, can get so focused on the larger responsibility and forget what is seemingly the smaller responsibility. This is a reminder to me and anybody involved in ministry that all those responsibilities are equal before the Lord. And if I need to find a balance point, I need to go to him and his example to get that, to find that, and to follow that. And that wasn't in my notes. What's interesting is this is where Mark says they went into Simon and Andrew's house. So this is the whole family living together. Yep. Peter, his wife. We know that Peter's married. In 1 Corinthians 9:5, it mentions Peter traveling with his wife, which completely annihilates the Roman Catholic teaching that he was a celibate priest. I'm not going to get into all that. But they even think archaeologists believe they found the actual house that Peter and his family lived in. And it's funny because it's just a simple stone dwelling. It's not a palace. It's not even a middle class home. It's for working class fishermen. This is where men who work with their hands live. Right? Very, very simple accommodations. Um, and they're just some incredible specific details that Mark is bringing in, which helps us accept the validity of this is an eyewitness account. This is historically accurate. It's not being embellished. It's not adding, legend, myths and to the legend or any of that. It's just simply stating simple details that really don't, unless you're looking at it, you really don't see how they would embellish the story at all. But here's something else to consider. This is typical first century Middle Eastern Jewish culture, way of life. Jesus enters into that world, but he enters not as an invader, but as a fellow traveler, if you will. The kingdom come near. That's the incarnation. And he's welcomed. He's invited. He's welcome. He's think about the sense of familiarity. It says that that his mother-in-law was sick, fever, laying in bed. So she'd been in bed. She'd been bedridden, right? And she had a high fever, scary, right? It doesn't say high fever here, but Luke's account does. What's interesting about Luke's account of this, Luke was a doctor, so he's when he says high fever, it could be malaria, it could be something else, it could be something very, very serious, life-threatening. But the very first thing they do is they go to Jesus and tell him. Do you think they're expecting another miracle? Or is it something more personal than that? Have they learned something about him already that makes them know, helps them know that he's going to welcome that conversation? They just told Jesus. Are they expecting something or are they hoping for something? And I think it's more of a hope because of what they're seeing in Jesus already. And that hope, when you have hope, it gives you confidence. So they're not begging, they're not pleading, just saying, Jesus, this is what's going on. Um, let's see. What else we got? Mm, I got a lot. I've just skimmed over a lot of my. That's all right. Yeah, I think another part of this, then telling them, is we get a peek at their faith developing, right? They saw the demon obey his word. If he's got the power to command demons, right, the spiritual realm, surely he can handle a fever, because a fever was nowhere near as terrifying as a demon. So their faith is new, a little bit tender, undeveloped yet, but it's still real. And it's enough faith to bring them to the point where they tell Jesus about the need. They're not asking him anything. They're just telling him what the need is.
Yeah, they didn't even ask.
They didn't even ask anything. Um, but think about how they're already forming some close relationships. They feel comfortable bringing him into their home and being around their family. They didn't really know much about him other than come follow me, right? But what they'd seen in the synagogue. So that tells us something about his demeanor, how he carried himself. There was something about the way he carried himself. It was a calm, confident assurance. It wasn't an arrogant, it wasn't prideful, it wasn't chest high, chin up. It was that calm, confident assurance because he's absolutely certain of who he is. He is the kingdom come near. The kingdom of God come near. There was no variation in that room, no doubt, no uncertainty. What's funny is, um, it's like she's sick. No special prayer language, none of that, right? I can remember a story that I heard years and years and years ago from a guy that he was in a denomination in a church that did all of the fancy prayer stuff, right? And one morning he got up and his wife was really, really sick. They had a little one about not quite 5 years old, getting ready to go to preschool. And he's praying. He's doing all the praying and all the fancy praying that he knows how to do, and she's getting worse. So he just feels like, I need to shut up because she's getting sicker and not better. I don't understand this. Little boy walks over, puts his hand on his mom, and he said, Jesus, please make mama better. And like that, everything calmed down and stuff. He goes, I have to have the faith of a child. I've always had so much faith in the way I prayed, but I thought that was going to be the power that brought healing. My son showed me it wasn't. Yeah. This also tells us that God doesn't care just about the spiritual problems. He cares about the everyday physical challenges that we face. Health-wise, sure. Are you hungry? Do you need
I
a
was gonna
place to
say,
sleep?
somebody needed to cook food.
What?
I was gonna say, somebody needed to cook food.
So, yeah, we got a house full, man. Somebody's got to cook, right? And yeah, there's no indication that any of these guys knew how to cook.
Because she got up immediately and started serving.
Exactly. But it's interesting. It says, so he went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. Raised her up is the same language we see every time the resurrection is mentioned, especially in Mark.
Huh.
But think about it, he went to her. They have no idea if she's contagious or not. But he went to her and he took a firm grip on her hand. Right? Have you ever had somebody grab a hold of your hand and there was just a strength in it that was comforting and reassuring? It wasn't crushing. That's what this word conveys. It's by the hand, very personal touch. Right? And he raised her up. So his strength transferred to her. The thing is that she was immediately well. Immediately. No hesitation, no gradual, the fever broke, none of that. She was immediately and fully healed. So this is very personal, but it's full of compassion. The power of the kingdom is compassion filled. It doesn't have just the power to do what needs to be done. It's done with a heart of compassion. Jesus being incarnate, the incarnation, God with us. We see that in a big general way, but he's showing this is in a very personal way. That's why we talk about salvation being individual and collective. Whosoever will, but you are a royal nation, a holy priest, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of God's own choosing. That's a collective. So it's individual and collective. And these two scenes, we see the reality of that the kingdom of God is both individual, the incarnation is individually manifested, and collectively. This is kind of a bold move on his part too, and we know this throughout the rest of the narratives. We don't recognize that she's a ceremonially unclean as a leper. Anytime anybody had a fever, Levitical law had very elaborate provisions for how you dealt with sick people, right? And all kinds of others. But if the person was sick, they were ceremonially unclean. So that means you can't participate in the synagogue, and your normal interactions with other members of the community are limited.
They don't touch.
What's that?
They don't touch them.
Right.
Sure.
But he not only ignores the restrictions, he transcends them. And you can hear that theme. You've heard it said, but I tell you.
Yeah.
You've heard it said, but I tell you. He's living that out. What's that?
Oh, I just said this was out the Sabbath night too.
Well, right. And so the thing is that he's just bringing healing. Notice who's not there. The lawyers aren't there. The ones to tell him, you can't do this, it's the Sabbath. You know? But what's interesting is that the reason they had the laws of the laws of cleanliness and unclean and all that was to preserve holiness. And this shows us that Jesus' holiness doesn't need protection.
Mhm.
You know, we don't need to, he didn't need to defend it. He brought purity and holiness with him. He invaded that unclean space with his purity. No intimidation. Um, and so there's no fear of contamination for him.
Do you think sometimes that's why some missionaries can go into unclean areas and situations and not fear getting sick? I mean, they walk among sick people a lot and don't worry about it. I wonder why we don't see as many immediate healings like this. I feel like a lot of times we compromise. We're like, well, my fever's breaking. When you mentioned that, it made me think about, well, you must be healing me. My fever's breaking. I'm starting to feel better, but rarely are you better. What do you think that is?
The question becomes, what would be the point? What would his point be?
Well,
He always has a point when he brings that kind of healing. So and maybe there's no point to make in, sometimes it's just a gift. Sometimes, I mean, I felt horrible and Lord, I really want to feel better. Just something simple. And all of a sudden I'm better. But other times when I'm traveling to speak and I've gotten sick on the way, and I've been so sick I had to live on Dayquil, right? You listen to recordings of me, I'm like, man, who is that? He sounds so rough. Yeah. So again, it becomes, what's the point? Um, um, what's amazing about this story is we see the gospel in miniature, right? You look at miniatures and you got a whole city scene in one little box, right? But this is God coming down, reaching down and touching the brokenness of one person in one moment. Not just the whole big picture, but just one very special, particular. So he's not just observing our condition. He comes close to it, draws near to it, he touches it, involves himself in it. Right? That's that power and compassion. What's interesting is that when Jesus lifted her up, he didn't just remove her fever, he restored her to full fellowship and full service, as if she had not been unclean at all. He didn't have the Levitical authority to do that. He had kingdom authority to do that. But there's interesting is this sets a pattern for his followers. One of the things, areas of study that I've invested in over the years that really fascinates me is early church history. And as I was reading this, it reminded me of a couple of stories where how the church history shows how the church took this to heart. In the Antonine plague around 165 AD, they had a plague sweep through the empire, and people were fleeing cities because if you were in the city, you were going to get sick.
Where was this? In Antioch?
No,
Where was this?
It's the Antonine,
Where was it?
all over the Roman Empire,
Oh,
right? But Christians, remembering how Jesus touched the sick, stayed
yeah, that's what I was.
to nurse the dying, both believers and pagans, and often at great personal risk. Right? A century later, you've got the Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria. He writes that believers never spared themselves, but took charge of the sick, transferring their death to themselves. And even later, the pagan emperor Julian the Apostate complained, the impious Galileans, right? didn't care only for their own poor, but for the pagans as well. And that this love was winning hearts, and he hated it because Christianity was taking over the empire. So the compassion, personal compassion at great personal risk that Jesus displayed in that one home in Capernaum ended up spreading across the empire for hundreds of years. One of the things that really broke my heart when I started recognizing what had happened is the church got it so wrong in the 80s. When you had all of a sudden you had these young men all over American major cities who were getting sick, not getting well. They had no idea what they were getting sick from and why they were dying. The thing is that they very quickly figured out that this was due to homosexual behavior. But what ended up happening was these men were losing their jobs, they were losing the medical insurance, they were losing their homes. But instead of the church saying, we don't understand why this is all happening all of a sudden. We do know you've lost your job, you've lost your home, you've lost your medical insurance. So we're going to care for you. That's not what happened. Oh, they're bearing the results of their sin in their own flesh. That's what they got. So the gospel itself got lost.
I think that left a mark on the church for a long time too. I think a lot of people saw that and saw that unkind response to that. It's left a mark.
Well, several years ago, I can't remember exactly when, but I've shared this before a little bit. A preacher I love to listen to, hear him on the radio. He's preaching a message on Jonah. And I know the story. I'm familiar with this, taught the story. And I'm listening to it and I said, okay, what's the message I'm supposed to have? I'm not really sure. Wrong question. A few minutes later, I hear another preacher on the radio preaching Jonah. I'm thinking, okay, this is twice in less than a year. I really need to pay attention here. Still not getting anything. So then I heard Alistair Begg preach on it several months later. And the way I don't remember what he said or how he said it, but it changed the question I asked. The question I asked was, Lord, who are my Ninevites? And it rocked my world what he showed me. So Connie and I went to dinner and I told her, about the brand, and I said, God made it clear who my Ninevites are. And she goes, who? I said, homosexuals. I would rather see Hitler in heaven than see one of them in heaven. Well, so I started doing some research because right about the same time, Barna did a survey asking 18 to 28-year-olds, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think about Christianity in America? The third word that came to their mind was hypocrite. The second was judgmental. The first was anti-homosexual. Jesus was never anti-anybody, anti-sin, but not anti-people. And it shocked me that the church in America was seen as anti-people. And it absolutely changed the trajectory of my life and ministry. Yeah, and God did all kinds of things through that, odd, unusual. Yeah. Anyway,
Well, we ended up going and having a booth at the Pride Festival
yes,
in Portland.
we had a prayer chapel. Well, first one was in Portland. Yeah, we had a prayer chapel at the Portland Pride Festival. That was crazy. Anyway, so like I said, we've got resurrection vocabulary here. Mark is going to use the same word when he talks about Jesus raising Jairus' daughter in Mark 5. And then when Jesus prophesies his own resurrection, Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10. And then Mark 16 is actual resurrection. It's the same word, raised up. So when Jesus raises this woman from her, you know, her fever bed, if you will, Mark wants us to hear echoes of the resurrection power that Jesus carries with him. And it's the same power that Paul refers to that's at work in us in Ephesians 1. This power at work in you is the same power by which he raised Jesus from the dead, set him at his right hand, put all things under his feet. But, so it's resurrection power, ascension power, and dominion power. That's the power that's at work in us. That's amazing to me. But he just grabs a hold of her hand. He didn't say anything. He just grabs a hold of her hand and lifts her up, stands her on her feet. And she could just feel the strength flowing into her. So he doesn't just stop the fever, he restores her to full function. Like Connie says, it's about ability. He restores her ability to live life, to fulfill the role that she lived in. What? Yeah. Let's look at the contrast between the healing power that was very violent in the synagogue, but this is just very violent, very, very, very gentle, very quiet, very calm, very firm. But there's no be healed in the name of, or I command ye, right? Just touch and lift.
Right.
But yeah, there's no magical words, there's no special prayer, there's no religious form or formula. It's just this touch that carries the power with it. And didn't have to do any special anointing or just all of the things that we think we have to have. But remember, wherever we go, Christ is in us. That same Jesus is in us and we carry him with us. We don't have to look for anything else. The fever left her and she began to serve him. But the thing is, what's amazing about this, it departed, right? Well, when you look at Luke's account, it actually says that in Luke that he rebuked the fever. We don't have any words recorded, but the fever, this is burning. She's burning up, right? Immediately, everything was back to normal and she begins to serve. She's ministering to everyone. And again, it's not a gradual thing, it's an immediate thing. Right now, quick, fast, in a hurry.
It kind of proves too that Jesus, his presence rebuked the fever.
Yeah.
So we can't walk around with words rebuking things. We have to carry his presence. And if he chooses to do that, he can do that.
We have to remember this complete instant healing. This is what kingdom power can look like when God's reign breaks into human brokenness, but not that it always will.
Yeah.
And that's what ends a lot of people. Well, he's the same yesterday and today and forever. Yes, but he doesn't always do the same yesterday, today, and forever. Being and doing are not the same thing, right? How many times is he part of the Red Sea? Oh, once. How many times has somebody completely been resurrected from the dead and never died again? Once. Because everybody that Jesus raised from the dead died again. But one of the fascinating things about all this is you see Jesus's attitude toward disease and death. If you think about it, he disrupted every funeral he ever went to, including his own. He's not a fan of funerals. He just breaks them up. She had a fever that was probably going to kill her, and he wasn't having it. He just wasn't having it. We see that in John 11, where it says Jesus, deeply indignant, said, "Take me to where you laid him," right? And they take him, and everybody's sobbing, and then says, Jesus, deeply indignant again, said, "Roll away the stone." It's kind of like he's jacked about what the enemy has managed to pull off on those who created him in his image. It's like he rolls up his sleeves and says, "Okay, devil, You're getting a black eye, bloody nose, and a torn lip. Okay? You're not getting away with this anymore. Precarious.
That's so encouraging.
Um, what's interesting about this is you see that when you take a look at the language that he uses where she was serving, she served and kept serving. It was a house full. But this was normal life for her. It wasn't a burden. She actually delighted in this. This is how she lived life. So the restoration is not just to function, but to fellowship and fruitfulness.
She was needed too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she's preparing the Sabbath meal. Who's going to feed all these people?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
And this is a very specific meal. You can't have Uber Eats deliver it.
Come here. Lily.
But she doesn't just serve her family as is normal. She also serves the guests, which includes Jesus and the other disciples. Everyone's welcome. We got enough. But the flavor of the narrative is it's very grace filled. And it's like she received grace and she poured that grace back out. So when we're not being gracious, what does that tell us about what's going on with us? We don't appreciate, we're not celebrating the grace that's been bestowed on us. He who's forgiven much loves much. Sound familiar? There's a whole lot of things that we see here, but we look at the character and economy of the kingdom. There's no hierarchy. God not only knows absolutely every personal need, but he knows what answer is needed and when that's needed. And sometimes, remember that old country song, some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayer? Well, that's actually kind of theologically inaccurate because the wait and no are both answers. I understand what they're saying, but no is an answer, and not yet is an answer. I think years and years and years ago, the way I heard someone explain it to kids was when God says no, it's a red light. When God says later, it's a yellow light, and when he says absolutely, it's a green light. And that kind of helps, a little bit. But what's interesting is think about what the disciples are learning on day one. Day one as disciples of Jesus, right? They see that he has unprecedented authority to teach in ways that nobody had ever heard before. But they also see he has the power. He has power over demons. He's not afraid of religious opposition. So there's a boldness. But there's a power that's manifested in the kingdom because Jesus is taking it with him. He's bringing it with him. We had this conversation the other day. If our government were to surrender to a foreign power, okay, all the heads of the government would be in submission, and the departments, all that stuff would be in submission and surrender to this new governing power. But guess what? It would take a while for that to filter down into every area. And in America, there are going to be pockets of resistance.
Red Dawn.
There are going to be pockets of resistance all over. it will not easily be overcome and will not easily end up being subjected to this new authority. Well, that's what happens to those who will resist the authority of the kingdom. They eventually will be overwhelmed. Eventually will be overwhelmed. But the disciples go from the morning in the synagogue to the afternoon in Peter's home. We haven't even gotten to the end of the day yet. We haven't gotten to sundown when, okay, now the Sabbath is over and we see all kinds of stuff happen in part 2 of this. But this is what we see with discipleship. Jesus says, come and see what I'm doing. And we're going to see him do this with me. Go do it, come back, debrief, and we'll repeat the whole process. That's what discipleship is. So he's demonstrating, but he's going to tell them to go and duplicate what he's doing. And we'll see that several times. So next time we're going to look at what happens as the sun sets in Capernaum. Watch as the sun comes up. Next time we're going to look at as the sun sets. We've seen in between. But what's interesting is that we're going to see the whole city of Capernaum gather at Peter's door. They're going to pack in around Peter's home. Because word's out. Jesus that did this amazing thing in the synagogues at Peter's house. Well, Simon's house at that point. But you go from the synagogue, one small group, to a woman in a house, to an entire city. The entire city. Now, is it absolutely every human being that lived there? No, but there's so many there. You'd have a hard time figure out who wasn't there. Right? So what we're going to look at next time is, so what does Jesus do when he's face to face with these completely different circumstances than he's had at any other point? This is the first day of official launch of ministry, right? Just there's a steadiness, and we see it through all of the Gospels, but there's a steadiness that he establishes from the very beginning that he wants us to recognize and know we can depend on. And a lot of times we don't live as if we can believe we can depend on that consistency. So when we lose sight of that, the dependability of his consistency, expecting the consistency to look other than what it actually is. So we've got one day, but what Mark is managing to do and showing us this one day over the several sessions that we look at this, he's giving us an overview of Jesus' life and ministry. He's giving us an overview of what the kingdom come near looks like. But it didn't leave, it's still here. Think of what Jesus says in John. He tells the disciples, I have to go away. Right? If I don't go away, I cannot send you the comforter that you're going to need, the other similar comforter. Because the church is going to grow from a few dozen to millions. Not enough for him to go around. The Holy Spirit is going to indwell each and every believer, and they take the kingdom with them wherever they are. And this is where we see it start. That's absolutely amazing to me. We don't have to be intimidated by circumstance. We don't have to be intimidated by circumstances in other people's lives. Remember, it says we're ambassadors. He's ambassadors, right? What does that mean? We represent him in his kingdom. So an ambassador doesn't show up on their own power, their own authority. It's not that they have the power of whatever government they're the ambassador for. We have the power and authority of the kingdom of God that we represent. We just need to do so the same way, with grace and clarity, and passion. That's how we represent his kingdom well. That's all I have for today. I don't know.
Yeah, if you-